Hey everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining us today for this week's Ask a Recruiter. I apologize, we're a few minutes late. We were having a couple of tech difficulties, so we are just going to be slide-based today, but we are still here. We are chatting all things panel interview, and we are happy to answer any questions you might have. So don't hesitate to put a question in the comment section. I am joined today with Jalen. Jalen is going to walk us through everything you need to know about panel interviews and give some tips and tricks and some preparation tools. And we are ready to jump on in. So, Jalen, you want to take it away?
Yes, I can. Apologies for the technical issues, everyone, but we're going to go through these slides and still get some depth of content here and some information about panel interviews. So let's go ahead and get into it. So definitely want to give you an overview because some people may not even know what a panel interview is. So a panel interview is when there are multiple interviewers at one time. So you can see in our graphic here, you may be on a panel with 3 people. It could be even just a panel of 2 people, anything that's more than one. So what that looks like is, there's different people representing different roles within the company. So this could be like a colleague, it could be your manager, it could be even as high up as the president or VP or CEO, depending on how involved they are with the interview process. And so that can kind of vary on what roles and what people are in your interview panel. It does allow the company to have multiple perspectives in this format. So it's valuable just to have, different backgrounds and ways of interpreting the interview process with that candidate. So, someone may have gotten something extra out of it that another interview may have overlooked, things like that. So it's helpful to have multiple people. So that's why sometimes people do this format. There are a lot of advantages to panel interviews. So definitely some comprehensive evaluation, like I said, with those different viewpoints. So people may have overlooked something that someone else didn't, or maybe the way something was communicated was interpreted in a more beneficial way than maybe an interview originally had thought. And when they are able to discuss those things together, they're like, oh, wait, that makes a lot more sense. It just offers a lot of clarity from those different viewpoints and just different backgrounds and perspectives to kind of showcase your skills from different ways, as well as just allowing the team to assess each candidate's interaction. Like I said, everyone on the panel is different, and that includes their personalities and the way they interpret the information's communicated to them by candidate. So it allows them to see how you interact with different personalities, or a candidate gets to interact with the different personalities. So, someone's a little bit more quieter, you may be more reserved, but direct to the point. It allows them to see an interaction with colleagues of that nature, as well as people who are maybe really outgoing and, like to chit chat and kind of have a more conversational flow. It allows them to see how you're interacting with different personalities in real time. So it also could even speed up the hiring process. Let's say maybe they're in like their peak season and they really need someone to hop on the team, but they don't all have the time to interview throughout the week, and they all have a same day off, or maybe there's like a no meeting block on their calendars. They could all say, hey, can we just share this hour together and interview the candidate together? And we'll each have, a set amount of questions. That way the interview process is speedier. So instead of you having, 3 separate interview times or days even, they're all together at once. So it could just also speed up the interview process as well. So super beneficial to have a panel interview in different ways. Like I said, also a great way to make impression on several different interviewers. So like if you interview with your manager as well as a colleague at the same time, and even your manager's like supervisor, that's a great way to have different people's perspectives on you, and you make an impression on all 3. So let's say you hit it off really well with your peer in the interview, and they're like, I could definitely see myself working with someone with this skill set and this type of communication style. And managerial wise, the manager says the same thing. You even get to make an impression on people outside of your team that maybe you collaborate with, or maybe someone that's going to be overseeing your manager. And so it just gives you a better way to showcase your skills and make an impression on different people that maybe you wouldn't normally in a one-on-one interview. And even some interview panels are conducted right after a seminar or presentation, so that information is fresh. Let's say, for example, we see panel interviews all the time in like an actual seminar where someone's presenting their findings of research, or maybe a team is communicating their research findings in a study they've been doing over the last few years. And then afterwards they say, hey, we're going to have a panel interview where you can ask questions to our team or our scientists. And that's a great way to have different perspectives answering your questions. So likewise, they do that in the interview process for candidates. Maybe there's a way to ask a question that you get different answers from certain panelists, as well as things they want to add. Maybe you have a question and one panelist is like, I'm not super familiar with this area, but so-and-so is, and they're on the panel, and that panelist is able to answer that question. That's just another benefit of just having, 2+ more people on an interview. There are different ways that a panel interview can be formatted, so it's not strictly one way or the highway. So there are other formats where there are multiple people at the same time. So like I said, you can have 2+ people interviewing you at once, or maybe each panel member is going to have a set amount of time in like a serial format. So think of it like kind of speed dating, but in interview terms. So you may have, hey, this next hour, we're going to have each of these 3 panelists interview for a set amount of time. And, if they go over, then they go into the next person's time, or likewise, if they end early, the next person has more time with you. So there's also that type of format. Like I mentioned a couple of times now, but just to refresh your memory, this can include your peers, so people you'd be working with. So it's helpful to see their perspective and like how would they work day to day with you, as well as can they handle the job that I'm doing because I'm going to be working with them. So that's helpful to know. Then you have team members and members from other departments. Maybe you collaborate with a team outside of your direct team. Maybe it's with troubleshooting some tech issues or marketing materials, research and development teams on different departments. So that's helpful to have their kind of insight on how would you collaborate with me? What is your working method? How will we best work together? And likewise, as I mentioned, your direct manager, that's more common just because they are going to be in charge of you, as well as managing expectations and making sure you're doing well and succeeding in your role. So they're more than likely going to be on the panel, but I would say the most common is your manager and a team member and someone from a collaborating team if you're going to have 3, but typically more often than not, your manager is going to be somewhere in that panel interview. And likewise, if they're really hands-on, some people on the leadership team or the board may even hop into some interviews. Each company looks different and each role has a different, has different requirements and expectations. So that kind of looks different. But I would say something to just kind of expect going into it is a manager and a team member, and then the third, possibly a collaborative colleague. So something you can do to prepare for a panel interview, because I know it sounds overwhelming hearing you're going to have multiple people at one time. And so one thing you can do to make yourself feel more confident and at ease during the interview process is definitely look into some research about the company. So, and I don't mean just like that surface level, let's figure out what, who's doing what and what their, job title is. I'm talking like deep research. Let's talk about the company. What is the company's founding principles? What are they doing day to day? What is their end goal? You can look at your interview panelists if those are given to you ahead of time. You can look at their LinkedIns and see what they've been doing. So just kind of cater what you can research-wise to your panel interview, and just be best prepared as you can. So it only helps you to do more research. I would even suggest doing some common interview questions. If you're given the specific interview questions, then definitely practice those and be prepared with those answers. But if you're going in, with a wide open mind and you're not given any kind of prep work as far as what the interview questions could be, look up common interview questions on Google. Likewise, our biotech recruiters know a lot about this process. So if you're in the Slack channel with us, you can utilize that and ask those questions on what to expect for a panel interview as far as questions go. And definitely just prepare as best you can. Some common interview questions we'll go over here in a little bit, but there's those common few of like, what is something, an obstacle you had in your previous role that you overcame and how did you overcome it? Or tell us about a time that you were given no direction and how you were able to reach an end goal or something like that. It's very generic, but better to prepare with those generic questions and be prepared for those if they're asked than to go in blind and just hope for the best. And likewise, you will get some specific questions to the role. So look up some common interview questions for that specific role that you applied for. And more often than not, people are posting those, or recruiters like us in the biotech space are more educated on those things. And so we can help you better prepare for those. And then transition those questions into how to show your relevant skills and what you've been working in your work experiences, things like that. Because ultimately you're just wanting to sell yourself again. The only difference is instead of it being one-on-one, you're with a couple of people at one time. So still ultimate goal is to sell yourself. So let's make sure we prepare and look up some common interview questions and conduct some research. And something else is it's a little tricky because in one-on-one, it's so easy to be conversational. You're one-on-one, it flows typically, and you just know who to address. But in a panel, people that are addressing you, it's kind of confusing because you're in a room with, maybe 3 interviewers and one person asks you the question. Do you look at that person the whole time? Do you pan over to your panelists? Like, what does that look like? Definitely address each interview with respect and attentiveness. So if they're asking the question, respond to them. You can kind of graze the room if you feel more comfortable, talking directly to them and kind of glancing over during your answer at the other panelists, just so they feel involved and included. But make sure you're showing them respect and attentiveness to all of them during the interview process. Don't hone in on one interviewer. Maybe you're sitting and there are 3 in front of you. One's person's directly in front of you and one is on the left and the right. And it's easy to just stare at that one person in front of you and answer all the questions that way. But definitely pan to your interview panelists, as well as whoever's asking the question, address them more frequently in that answer. So that's one way you can kind of address the awkwardness of that panel interview. Okay. So something else that's interesting is when one-on-one, some people like to take notes and some people don't, and that's totally a preferential thing. But in a panel, it's always good to take notes during the interview process because it shows you're interested and that you're really attentive to detail, as well as that you are going to do the work. So if people are answering your questions and there's 3 people in there, take notes as they're talking and just say, hey, is it okay if I take notes? I have a pad and pen with me. I wouldn't recommend doing it on your phone because it does look like you're texting or doing something else. Even if you tell them that that's not what you're doing, it does look kind of awkward and make them feel like you're kind of aloof. So I would say do a pad and paper or a pen or anything like that that's more manual and show that you're interested and take those notes. If you're given the interview panelists beforehand, definitely look at their LinkedIn and see what they've been doing at the company that you're interviewing with, as well as previously. And just create specific questions related to their expertise. So if they have a background in research and development with genome sequencing, make a note of that and ask something specific about genome sequencing in their experience, or ask them something relevant to what they've been doing at the company. And let them know you looked them up. It shows initiative. It shows that you did the research. And so it's not awkward to say, hey, full disclosure, I was looking at your LinkedIn and I saw this and I found it interesting. Can you tell me more about it? Or can you tell me about what you've been doing at this company? I saw you on your LinkedIn, you've been doing X, Y, Z. It shows initiative. It shows you did the research, and it makes the interview panelists feel seen and connected to you because you have a common ground that you've now found outside of the work-related questions that have been presented to you in the interview. So definitely research the people on the panel if you're able to before. And likewise, if you're not given a specific panelist name beforehand, just look at the company website and go to the people and just see what everyone's been doing, get a general idea. So when someone's in your interview, if you don't know extensively what they've been doing, you have a general idea. Obviously, if they have a lot of interview panelists, or if they have a large team, that'll be a little more difficult, but just get a general idea, recognize some faces or some names. That'll just put you ahead. And like I mentioned, try to find something each panel member has that you can connect with. Maybe you guys went to the same university. Maybe you did the same type of research and development in your doctorate program. Maybe you're in the same location, same city, and you're like, hey, I recently went to this event in the town. How have you found this, the Boston area? I'm looking to move or something. Find that common ground. It can only help you to make them feel connected to you because that helps them connect to your application as well as what you'll be like on their team. Excuse me. So during the panel interview, you can definitely get more info that's related to the role of the company, but also that is specific to the panel member. So for example, let's say you're interviewing to be on the marketing team at a biotech company. And you did some research and you're wanting more info related to the marketing department, but the only person on your panel interview that is in the marketing team is directly working in your role is the colleague that I mentioned. Your manager is more managerial. a little less hands-on doing that marketing work. And likewise, people you're collaborating with may not do marketing at all. They may be asking you to do marketing for them. So how are you going to find out more info about the marketing department? Well, I would suggest knowing beforehand, if you can, the panel member that is on the marketing team or a colleague. Likewise, typically they give a brief introduction when they come into the panel interview about themselves. So if they say they're on the marketing team, then that would be a good way to be like, okay, I want to ask my marketing questions to this panel member because they would know those answers. And it just shows that you were listening as well. So if you say, hey, you mentioned you were on the marketing team directly and that we would be working together, I would love for you to tell me about the daily kind of expectations of the team and what our marketing day-to-day looks like outside of the job description. That's something great to note there. It shows that you're taking initiative, you listened, as well as you're really trying to connect with who on the team am I going to be working with, and I really want to get some answers so I can be better prepared for this role if I was to be hired on. Bringing materials for each member. So like I mentioned, background on them, trying to understand what they do and how long they've been doing it, things like that. Bring that preparation material for each member, as well as your answers, cater your answers to each team member. So if you're answering a marketing related question about your workload, you can even say, hey, ex-panelist, I bet you understand this since you're within the marketing field as well, but it's been an interesting job market, or my workload looks like this. I'm sure you can relate. It kind of shows you're being relatable to each team member based on what they do. And also it shows you came with things prepared. And also something that a lot of people don't think about, but that can happen just unconsciously, is treating all panel members equally. So let's say you're in there with a colleague, your manager, and then the CEO of the company. I feel like it's so easy when you're in a panel to be like, they're the CEO. I need to be more focused on them. They have a higher position. I need to really be showcasing to them, but then you neglect the manager and the colleague that you'd be working with. And that's not good. So we want to treat everyone equally on the panel, answer them equally, have the same tone and atmosphere when you're answering questions with them. Don't, for lack of better terms, blow off the colleague with your answers and kind of give a blasé, nonchalant answer in tone. And then the CEO be very articulate and format your answers very descriptively, that they'll realize that in the interview. A lot of panelists do multiple panel interviews, so they know kind of how things go. And if someone's feeling like they're being favorited or not favorited, that tone will be sensed in the interview, and it's not something beneficial for the candidate. So definitely be sure to treat all panel members equally. And like I mentioned, just the professionalism and respect, no matter their seniority. If a CEO is in the panel with you, don't be more professional and respectful to them and kind of neglect your other panelists. Everyone needs to be on an equal front. Equal professionalism and respectfulness is given to each panel interviewer. So just be mindful of that. Don't kind of hyper focus on one person. Even likewise, if you don't hyper focus on the CEO and you hyper focus on your manager, it's not helpful on any front. So make sure you're treating everyone equally and giving them the same level of professionalism and respect. And also when you're answering, make sure you give attention to the panel member who asked the question. As I mentioned before, it's easy to feel awkward because you're in a group, and you want to be inclusive to everyone in the group, but one person asked you the question, so you're not sure where to look, who to address. Definitely focus on the person that asked you a question, but pan yourself left and right, or side to side with your head, so you're looking at everyone. So what I would say is, let's say the person directly in front of me, there's 3 people. One person on my left, one on my right, and one in the middle. The person on the left asked me the question. So I would look at them and kind of start my answer. And then as I'm speaking, I would pan to the middle and right interviewer and then work my way back to that original person who asked me the question. It just shows that you're being inclusive and keeping everyone included, but also you're directly answering that panel member who asked you the question. It is easy just to hyper focus on that one person who asked you. And that's obviously, it's not a pro or con. It's just something to be aware of. So, if it's a short and easy question to answer, then you can do so in a quick manner with that one panel member. But I would really recommend panning to make everyone feel included, because if they all feel included in your answers, they're all listening to your answers. If they feel like, oh, he or she's answering X panel member, they might tune you out. typically they don't because they're panelists, so they want to hear all the answers, but it's just a way to make them feel included and engaged. So think of it, if you were in the reverse situation, you were asking the question or you were just sitting next to the member who asked the question, you would want to feel engaged by being, panned to or at least acknowledged during the answer. So that's something to be aware of. And our recruiters are really good about helping with people in their behaviorisms and mannerisms in panel interviews. So definitely reach out to us in the Slack channel if you have any questions about that. And then one other thing you can do is prepare your answers with a common interview question, as we mentioned, or your elevator pitch. So what does that look like? So if you prepare those common interview questions prior to time, you'll feel more confident and able to answer those questions smoother. And likewise, if you know your elevator pitch going in, you know what you're selling yourself on. So we talk about elevator pitch in all of our collaboratory courses, it feels like, and in our Slack channels and on our social media. But your elevator pitch is really what you're trying to sell yourself as. Are you trying to sell yourself as an expert in a certain field, as someone who's transferring, has transferable skills that are really beneficial to a new role? Are you trying to, pitch yourself as someone who is trying to grow in their career and they're on this journey with their team? What does that look like? And so you really want to know your elevator pitch prior to, so you know what to pivot to whenever you're trying to sell yourself. So if they ask questions, okay, well, that relates to this part of my elevator pitch and that would sell me in this way. So if you know that going in and have it on your, cover letter or on your LinkedIn, it's easy to remember if you do that. But that's just what you always pivot to whenever you feel like you're losing what you're trying to do in the questions, because sometimes these questions are daunting and they're long-winded answers, or maybe they're a little more complex. But if you know your elevator pitch, it's easy to be like, how does this question relate to what I'm trying to sell myself as, and then relating it to that. So if you know that beforehand, it's really helpful. Okay, so that panel interview. Here's some format and questions that could be asked. So each member usually introduces themselves, as I mentioned before, and they give a brief background about their roles. So it's usually very brief. When I say brief, I'm talking like if you have an hour interview, they're typically only talking for a minute or maybe two, because they don't want to take up much of the time talking about themselves. So they'll give a brief background, typically like, my name is so-and-so. I've been working here for X amount of years. This is what I do. Is the typical format, but they may go into a little more detail beyond that, but that's the typical way they go about it. So be sure you're listening to those. Don't just tune them out and focus on what you're about to say in response. You need to be listening, because if they, like I said, mention that they're on the marketing team and you're going into marketing and the other two panelists don't mention marketing, you know where to direct your marketing questions. You know who's going to understand the marketing volume or expertise or skills you're going to be talking about the most. So that's something super helpful to hear. And they also may explain more about what the team structure is and why they're doing a panel interview. Because like I said, sometimes it's due to time. Sometimes it's due to wanting to get different perspectives all at once. There's different reasons they do a panel. So they may explain that, and they may also explain the structure of the team. Like, I am your colleague. You'll be working with me. So-and-so is your manager. You report to them. They report to this person. It's helpful to hear the structure and kind of understand who's doing what and how that works with the role you're applying for. And then you really want to match the panel's interview style. So some people keep it more professional, as far as it's very like, I don't want to say like formatted to a certain degree, but you understand in professionalism, they know what they're doing. They know what they want to say. They keep it short and to the point. They were really focused on getting that data and those answers from you. Whereas conversational interviews styles are more, hey, I'm just going to present this question and kind of see where it goes, and then we'll flow from there. And they're more thinking on the spot or adaptive to the personality of the person. Each company does it differently. So just match to their style. If you're for example, I'm a more conversational interview style. So when I interview at places, I'm very conversational, and I know my answers, but I have it in a very easy, like smooth format. So they feel like they're just having a chit chat with me. But if they start giving me professional like style, where they want me to be more, here's my data, and using the STAR method, which I'm about to go over, then I would need to recalibrate my interview style instead of trying to push them to do mine, if that makes sense. You need to be adaptable and adapt to what style they have. So whether you have a preference in one or the other, doesn't really matter in that interview, just as long as you can read the room and say, okay, we need to pivot and this needs to be my format moving forward. STAR method, as I mentioned, some people don't know what this is. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and resolution. And so that's how you format your answers to behavioral questions. So you should probably expect some follow-up questions, because typically when you do that, they follow up with like, how did that work out? Or, what were some outcomes from that resolution, things like that. But let's say you're asked about a complicated project you were given and given no direction, as I mentioned before. So you would say the situation, here's what I was handed, and here's the direction I was given, which was not really any direction at all. They said, just make it your own. The task, here's what I was tasked with doing for that project. The actions I took to complete that project and what I was actively doing. And then the resolution, what happened in the end, what was the outcome, and how did it affect the company? That's kind of what that STAR method looks like. And that's a very popular method amongst the professional interview style, but it can also be helpful during that conversational style, because it keeps you on task, and you can be a little more conversational with how you present it, but ultimately you're still getting the same data to them as well. Okay, so something you may be wondering is, what are some common panel interview questions that I could be asked? So there are some, common interview questions, but I would like to preface that these are not always the case, but this just gives you a good idea of what to expect going in. And likewise, look up some common interview questions for your specific role, because more often than not, people post those, whether they interviewed themselves or they are interviewing, just to help people for future. So definitely look into these. But something I would note is, when you're answering similar questions from different members, don't say the same exact thing. You want to highlight different skills and strengths. So even if your answer is the same, how you format it and what skills and strengths you highlight can be different. So for example, if someone says, can you tell me about a time you were successful in mentoring a peer? So if you highlight, I was successful in mentoring this peer in this X amount of time, they started putting out this much % increase in volume. This was their speed handling these issues decreased by this %, things like that. And then this is what I learned from it. I learned to be more patient, and I learned how to communicate to someone with a different communication style than me. I learned how to keep my team accountable and my team members accountable to their timelines and their deadlines. And then the same panel interviewer says, hey, I want to know about a project where you saw some success, and you're like, well, I just answered that. You could say, well, like I mentioned before, I had this project, but let me tell you about a different project where I did the XYZ. Or I also want to pivot back to my original answer over here, but also I want to mention what else I learned skills and strength wise from this project that I didn't mention before. Make it have some variety and some spice, because if you're just repeating yourself, it seems repetitive. And even though they're asking you the same question, that's intentional typically, because they want to hear how you frame things differently on the fly, and also how you can turn one set of data or project into multiple different things. So they want to see how you can spread out the data, or how you can describe your skills in different lights. So that's a way they do it. They say, okay, I'm going to give them the same question, and based on that question, how do they answer to me versus so-and-so? Also shows how you pivot your communication style based on the personality, right? Because I mentioned the interviewers have different styles. So someone's more professional wants that STAR method, and someone's more personal wants that flow. You could kind of state the same project, but give them different things and in a different tone. So it just shows you're adaptable to communication style, which is what a lot of companies are looking for. So that's really helpful to know as well. One of the common things that you hear is, tell me about yourself and why. Why do you want to work here? So that is something that a lot of people ask and it's kind of generic, but that's something to be very prepared for. So tell me about yourself. Give your elevator pitch, right? This is a good time to pitch yourself and sell yourself. And then what your elevator pitch is and how you're selling yourself relates to the company and the role and what they're looking for. If you can transfer your skills and experience into what they're looking for, that's a perfect way to answer this question. Examples of collaboration, team building, and problem solving. Those are in a lot of the behavioral questions. Like I mentioned before, how did you collaborate with a team on this project? What was the result? How did you mentor a peer? Tell us about a time you were given something with no direction. That's problem solving. Those are typically hidden within the questions they're asking. So they're not looking for specific details like what was the project outcome as much as they're trying to see how you problem solved, collaborated, and are working together on a team. And likewise, as you communicate, they're wanting to see your interpersonal communication skills. So as you're talking to them, they're assessing that, as well as some of the questions they ask, maybe how do you handle conflict or disagreements with coworkers? How is a complicated or uneasy task going to be communicated and handled by you? That's what they're trying to see, because those arise in the workplace, whether you want them to or not. So they want to see you handle it professionally and be personable and make sure it gets handled in an appropriate manner. So that's something else that is common to prepare for. Something to know, don't rush your answers. Take your time to think about the answer, but don't take too much time. Just, if you need a minute, just say, oh, that's a great question. Let me think about that. And then start your answer. Give yourself a little bit of grace in that, as well as be concise in your responses. Don't get too focused on the details that you lose the point. Make sure you stay on task. Details are important, include them, but don't go on a tangent, so to speak, of how this certain detail came about when it's not relevant to the STAR method or the end goal. So stay on task, be concise in your responses. And for questions for the panel, make sure you always have questions for each panel member. Don't want anyone to feel excluded, but likewise, it's a good way to showcase you did your research and that you were inclusive. So if you looked at everyone's LinkedIn, have one question per panel member about something on their LinkedIn or something they've done in their career. Or if you weren't able to find those things prior to, just have 3 questions or however many are on your panel, have that many questions prepared so each person's asked something. And then if they don't know it, obviously they'll let you know they don't know, and maybe another panel member will jump in, but just have something to ask everyone. And then if the time is too short and you're running out of time because maybe it was going really well and the time was just cut short, you can always follow up with them via email with those questions as well. And also likewise, you can ask the recruiter and they'll get to the panel as well. So last but not least, post-interview follow-up, definitely write something to each panel member post-interview. If you're connected with them on LinkedIn, send it there. If you have their emails, email them. If you only have the recruiter, then definitely just message the recruiter and say, hey, can you pass this along to each panel member? More than likely, they will do that because it shows that you're taking initiative and you're really interested in the role. Or you connect with the members after the interview and then send them a note there. Just make sure it's personalized for each member. Add something specific you found interesting from them or that you found out about them during the interview, or something that you maybe researched beforehand and didn't mention. You can say those there just so they know it's catered to them. It's not generic. And let them know you're still interested in the position after speaking with them. That way they know, hey, they listened to me, the interview went well, and they're still interested after we all said and done when we talked. And then reflect on the conversations and questions that were asked during the panel. Make sure you identify any areas of interest, maybe somewhere you could improve, or areas of professional growth that you see at the company. Just make sure when you took those notes that you're reviewing them. And so that way you're really intentional about taking on the role. If they talk to you in the future, you can even note, if you have another interview after the panel, hey, previously my panel, we talked about XYZ. I really want to elaborate on that more. And it shows, wow, they really listened and they're really interested in the role and taking initiative. So that I would recommend that as well. And that is actually my last slide for this. Alison, do we have any questions or anything in the chat going on?
We do. We have time for one question. And so here is the question. Does one person in the panel, other than the hiring manager, have more weight in the applicant hiring process? Ooh, that is a really good question.
Ooh, great question. So here's what I'll say about this. It's not a clear, concise answer, but you going into the interview need to assume everyone's on equal front, right? We want everyone to have equal respect and intentionality in the interview process, especially in a panel. And although each company is different in how they format things, some companies are the hiring manager, colleague, and like CEO or collaborative team member all have equal say. And it is like truly a vote process, like majority vote on who is inclined to hire and who is not. So I would say go into it assuming no one has extra weight, because I feel like if you go in with that mindset, you're going to cater to that interview panelist, and that's not something you want to do. However, each company is different. Sometimes the hiring manager does have the ultimate say, but sometimes your recruiter has the ultimate say. It just depends. So I would go in with an open mind that everyone's on equal front and has equal say in your hiring process. That way you go in with a very equal slate. And then if later in the interview process, someone does have more weight, everyone was treated equally. So that's something that you prepared for and no one has like specialization or feels catered to. But that is a great question. It does vary by each company, but I would say just assume everyone has equal say.
That's a great answer. That's really good advice. Jalen, thank you so much for such an excellent Ask a Recruiter session. If we didn't get to your question or you think of something later, as always, you are welcome to join us in our free Slack community. You can find Jalen and myself in there, and we are happy to answer any questions at any point in time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.